Welcome to the Right Hand Roadmap, the podcast for seconds in command of founder-led companies. I'm your host, Megan Long, owner of Second First. In each episode, we show you the path to success on your journey as the number 2 leader in entrepreneurial companies. I am so happy you are here. Today, we are continuing our expert series with Hallie Warner. You might have heard me mention Hallie before. If you have gone through our certification course, then you definitely have heard me mention her before. Hallie is a leadership and business coach and the founder of the Founder and the Force Multiplier. She has 13 years of being an executive assistant and then a chief of staff to a serial entrepreneur working side by side with him to build several successful companies. She also is the co-author of 2 Amazon best-selling books, The Founder and the Force Multiplier, How Entrepreneurs and Executive Assistants Achieve More Together, and The 200% Life, Your Guide to Spiritual Growth and Business Success Without Meditating on a Mountaintop. After more than 15 years of providing executive support, Hallie began her entrepreneurial journey in 2024 and now provides coaching and online training to executive assistants, chiefs of staff, anyone in that executive support seat. I am so happy to have you here. I think that I have mentioned I am kind of geeking out a little bit. I'm such a huge fan of yours and your book, The Founder and the Force Multiplier, and your company. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So explain like I'm 5. What is the Founder and the Force Multiplier, and how do you help entrepreneurial businesses?
The Founder and the Force Multiplier is a coaching and consulting business. The primary product is the Force Multiplier Academy that is launching soon. And we empower and teach force multipliers, which typically are executive assistants or chiefs of staff or executive business partners, to think like a CEO, to own their careers and build really strong strategic partnerships. So we do that through coaching, training, through our content, books, and a newsletter.
I love it. Okay, so this concept of a force multiplier, my understanding is that it comes from the military, and it's this concept that applies to either like weapons or personnel that now has been kind of taken and reapplied to an entrepreneur's partner. Can you explain this like force multiplier concept?
Yeah, so that's exactly where I first heard it, was when I was in my heavy Navy SEAL days, when I was reading a ton of Navy SEAL books, and I read this whole, something about force multipliers. And I said, that is exactly what I feel like I do. And at that time, I think I was an EA transitioning into a chief of staff. And I said, that's exactly what all of these EAs and chiefs of staff that I know are doing. We are maximizing the effectiveness of the founder or the entrepreneur or the CEO that we work with. And so that is what I think a force multiplier does, is takes the leader's vision, communicates it, organizes it, delegates it, and then implements it across the organization. Though they're very often using other staff members to do that. I actually think a lot of times the EA or the chief of staff is not the one who's doing the work all of the time, much like the founder or the CEO, but they're using their staff, whether it's president, COO, CFO, to get the work done.
I have had so many conversations with entrepreneurs that are growing and scaling and have come to me saying, I need a second in command. And I look at their business and kind of where they're at in their growth journey. And they might think, I need a COO. I need someone like an integrator, like someone at a higher level. And it's like, I don't think you understand the power of a badass EA. I don't think you know how powerful that position can be. Read this book, and I will send them a link to The Founder and the Force Multiplier. And it's like it unlocks this mindset that people don't understand the actual role. Like, it is project management. It is so much more. In your opinion, what is the key difference between an EA, a chief of staff, and then a COO?
So there can be some overlap. However, all things considered, and if you have all of those staff members in place, where where the differentiation is, in my opinion, is the EA and chief of staff. They're focused on the principal first. So their primary responsibility is to whoever the leader is. And then within those two roles between EA and chief of staff, the EA, it's very hard to have a chief of staff if you don't already have an EA, because then the chief of staff is the EA. Because the EA is focused more on what are the demands of the day. It doesn't mean that they're not planning forward, but there is a lot of urgency that happens in a leader's life, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and you need someone to be able to respond and keep communication flowing. And very often that's where an EA will come in. Now, as the company continues to grow, they may need to add on a chief of staff, or if you're in a high growth startup, or maybe you're in tech or fintech, maybe you have a chief of staff who is assigned to a specific strategic initiative, or that is, again, principal first. They are supporting the principal in achieving that strategic initiative, or maybe they're working on really specific project management for redeveloping the leadership team or something like that. However, again, focus on the principal first, and it's not as simple as saying tactical and strategic, because executive assistants are incredibly strategic and chiefs of staff also need to be tactical. So it's a little bit dependent on the organizational structure. Sometimes you don't need a chief of staff. Sometimes your organization will be fully supported with an amazing executive assistant. And then we go to the COO, which is organization first. So their first responsibility is to maybe running into a division or a department or the organization and overseeing management of staff. Very often EAs and chiefs of staff don't have any direct reports. They might, but it's more rare, because their responsibility is maximizing the effectiveness of the leader. The COO's responsibility is maximizing the effectiveness of resources, finance, staff.
I also, tell me if you agree with this or not. I always put it in the filter of, if you have grown your company to a point where you still kind of see the path to get where you want to go, you just need a partner in, like you said, either managing the steps to get there, helping prioritize the work, helping get it done. That is kind of that high performing EA, chief of staff, that kind of role. If you know where you want to go, but you don't know how to get there, that is going to be someone like a COO that needs to come in and really organizationally put the pieces together and create the action plan of how to achieve those things with your leadership team.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I always remember as I was working with my principal, we worked together for over 13 years, and neither one of us ever wanted to actually run anything or right? Like our personalities were very much focused on vision, getting the right people in the right seats. And I was helping him achieve those things, what he needed to focus on as the founder of the company, meeting with the right people, working on his thought leadership. He was out front and I was there supporting all of those efforts. As soon as we launched a company, the first hire we made was either a president or a COO to actually run the organization, because we were on to the next company or the next idea and starting to formulate that until it got to a tipping point where we're like, okay, now we need someone to actually run it. Let's bring a great COO in to run the company, because neither one of us wanted to actually do that. Now, we could for a short period of time, and we certainly did in the beginning, but it was much, and the EA, chief of staff and principal, we were really all just more focused on vision, again, staying in front of trends, making sure we were hiring the right people to actually run the organizations.
You mentioned a mistake that you see is having a chief of staff without an EA, because then the chief of staff essentially becomes the EA. What other mistakes do you see commonly made when it comes to either the EA or the chief of staff role in growing organizations?
Yeah, two things immediately come to mind. One is not giving, it's usually specific to the executive assistant, they're not given enough access to the leader. And that may mean in time, that may mean they're not getting access to emails, they're not getting access to meetings and conversations. Great executive assistants are going to just invite themselves to the meeting. And that's what I teach them to do. But, oftentimes there's pushback, and in theory, we would prefer the leader to already have that inclination to want partnership. And in order to have partnership, you need access. So that's the kind of the one thing that I see really hinders the success of a long-term partnership. And then not investing into those individuals' growth. So we do often have conferences and training and coaching opportunities for other executives in the business. Not always those opportunities for an EA or a chief of staff, or very simply the leader not investing in the time and energy into developing that individual and teaching them how to also be a leader. So those are a couple of things that I see are mistakes.
When you talk about access, there's a lot of trust needed on the entrepreneur's side. How can an EA or a chief of staff or just someone in that second in command seat, how can they generate a lot of trust quickly if they're new to that role in order to earn that access?
Whatever the 20% of your role is, so whatever the top 20%, based off of the Pareto principle, 20% of your effort should produce 80% of your results, as long as you're choosing the correct 20%. So in an executive assistant role or chief of staff role, getting very clear on what your 20% is for your role and then over delivering. I mean, I know that's not necessarily it's not the most common way to start building trust, but like initially you need to just do your job and do it extremely well, because otherwise, honestly, the entrepreneur, the leader, they're not going to invest time and energy into developing a relationship or building trust beyond the beginning of that relationship, because you need to do the job and you need to do it incredibly, incredibly well. So once you've done that, which I think should take no more than 90 days, ideally you should do it in 30. Once that is complete, then yes, there's other things you can do to build trust. I like to have partnership conversations in the very beginning of the relationship and really go through things like, what do we want this relationship to look like? Talking about behavioral styles, how do we best communicate? What are our boundaries? What are our expectations around how we work together? And I mean, trust is a long-term thing, but at least setting the stage around some of those initial expectations, I think, can be helpful. Knowing that you have to invest time and energy, and that can come in the form of weekly one-on-ones. That can come in the form of when you're sharing interesting podcasts or reading the same books. I think a lot of that does get developed over time, but there does have to be a willingness from both parties to want that sort of relationship.
By your definition, what are some of the functions of an EA? Like, what should an entrepreneur actually expect from an executive assistant? Because I think the default is always like, well, calendar management or just these very low level things, not the, like you said, more strategic things, the things that are more project managey. So what are some of those functions?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the company and what the needs of the leader are. But back to the 80-20% rule, the quick rule of thumb is, what is the leader's 20% in their role, the entrepreneur? Maybe they're still involved a little bit in sales, but generally they should be leading the organization, removing any roadblocks, and making high quality decisions. And maybe there are, again, some business development or sales responsibilities. Outside of those four things, the leader shouldn't be touching anything, in my opinion, which therefore means anything else that the leader needs to accomplish gets handed off to their executive assistant. And that is anything. Yeah, right. I know it's a lot, but that is the benefit of having an incredible EA. I believe that the Founder, the Force Multiplier, those two pairs, it's just one really high level, high impact role. They're just doing two different parts of it. And that's why I always say the EA and Chief of Staff are so closely tied to the executive. It's really one job. They're just dividing up the work. So an EA might be doing anything, to your point, like calendar, travel management. They're doing client follow-up, research, meeting prep. They may be helping them with not just with preparing for company meetings, but maybe this individual needs to be doing podcasts, writing content on LinkedIn. They're doing all of that. figuring out what tools that the organization or need to be using for communication flow, implementing that. Honestly, the list goes on and on. Again, it depends a little bit on what the leader is responsible for, but any of the, getting signatures, contracts, working on cataloging all of their ideas and putting them into a parking lot and then reprioritizing them as needed, helping with interviews. Maybe they're doing the front end and the back end of the interview process and the leader is just making that final decision. Working closely with the bookkeeper to make sure that we're getting reports on time and keeping that information flowing, whatever needs to happen so that the leader can make really great decisions. So that might be putting the reports together yourself, working with the team to get reports back to the leader. The list is really endless.
It's such a fun role, honestly, like to never be bored and to always be working on something new and what I consider to be exciting. In your book that you co-authored, The Founder The Force Multiplier, there was a piece in one of your sections that was so short, but to me unlocked something in my brain. And it was the 0 to 10 principle. And will you explain that a little bit? Because I reference that so often. I use that so often. It's in our trainings and it even gives you credit for it in our trainings. So I just love it so much. If you could just explain it.
Sure. So most entrepreneurs have a million ideas and things that they want to do. And usually they have this big idea, but it's only fleshed out to about a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's I want to start a speaker series, or I want to start a coaching company, or I want to launch a podcast, or I think we need to hire a new CFO. That's about as far as it gets. And so what I say is that, whether it's the EA to the chief of staff, whoever the right-hand partner is, takes that idea and takes it from about a 1 to a 9. And that is all of the minutia that goes into fleshing out projects and getting pricing and understanding your options, or you're vetting specific tools, or you're, putting the whole business plan together for whatever that new initiative is. And then you usually bring it back to your executive around a 9 and say, do you want option A or B? And they might make a couple of small changes. And then at that point, it's a 10. And then you either go implement it as the force multiplier, or sometimes it's handed off to, if it's a brand new business, in our case, sometimes when it sits at 10, we would hand it off to our new, general manager or our new COO, whoever was going to run that business, and say, okay, now it's yours, go. So that's the 0 to 10 principle.
The brilliance in this, in my opinion, is handing it back to the entrepreneur or to the CEO at a 9 with a few last decisions. So here's 10 speakers for our event. I need you to narrow them down to 5 or something along those lines. So it's they still see themselves in the work, even though they didn't do most of it. I think when an entrepreneur brings on a right-hand partner, whether it be an EA or a chief of staff or a COO, it's easy to delegate so much that they can feel put out to pasture in their own company. So the 0 to 10 principle I love because it still incorporates them into this work that is their idea, even though everyone's staying in their zone of genius. You're able to put together the action plan, put together the schedule, do everything you're great at, and they're able to just kind of stay in the vision and the key decision making. So I love it so much. I think it's so smart. What was a learning experience or a moment of growth in being a chief of staff yourself for so long with him?
I would say one of the and it didn't happen overnight, but one of the things that I had to be really intentional on, especially moving from an executive assistant to a chief of staff role, I was still fairly early in my career. I had to really learn how to have fierce conversations with my principal. And if you've ever worked with a visionary leader or an executive who either, they're usually a high D personality, super direct, demanding. I mean, I'm a high D too, so it worked out well. But, but, there's, I don't want to say it was an intimidation factor, but it is their company. They are the founder of the organization. They, at the end of the day, can make the decisions that they want to make. However, I believed it was my job as a chief of staff and force multiplier to say the hard truths, to bring issues to light that nobody else was willing to share, to let him know when he was wrong or he made a decision that could potentially negatively impact the organization. And that was something I really knew I needed to do as a chief of staff. So I really dove into learning how to do that, whether it was through books. I love the book Fierce Conversations. It is by Susan Scott. It is one of the best books about how to actually engage in those types of conversations. That one in Crucial Conversations is fantastic. But also knowing that it was so important to say what needed to be said and having to remove the personal from it, because I knew that, and we had agreed to this too right ahead of time, but I knew that the only reason I was saying it was not for my personal agenda or personal gain. It was because it was for the good, at least from my perspective, it was for the good of the organization. And if I knew that what I said was coming from that place, I couldn't really be wrong no matter what the outcome was, because it was for the good of the company. So took a little while to move through that growth journey. But again, I just think that is what force multipliers do. And entrepreneurs need those individuals. Usually it's one, maybe two individuals in their organization who are willing to do that.
You made the evolution from EA to chief of staff. And clearly, if you were there for 13 years with him, you grew with him and with the company. How can someone in the EA position make sure that either their principal or their organization doesn't outgrow them? And how can they make sure that they're growing along with the business and the CEO or their executive, whoever they basically support?
Yeah, it is interesting because if the leader that the executive assistant is supporting is not also committed to their own leadership journey and their own growth, not just growing the company, but really even just growing themselves as an individual and growing their leadership lid. I have seen so many incredible executive assistants say, okay, I've hit my ceiling here. And because their success is so closely tied to the success of the principal, if that principal is not willing to grow, or maybe they are like, okay, my business is doing 100 million in sales. I'm cool with that. But the executive assistant isn't. And so they need to go find that new opportunity. Now, that being said, I do think that the executive assistant force multiplier can encourage growth and encourage them to invest into their own leadership growth by leading up. And that might be by challenging their perspective on certain things. It may be as simple as saying, let's read this book Multipliers together, or let's read, Profit First and shift the way the company is handling our finances so that we can move to that next level and get to our next revenue goals. I actually think the force multiplier kind of becomes a bit of a coach to the leader in the partnership, because who else is going to do it for that executive if it's not the person who they're working most closely with? I don't know if that answered your question completely.
It absolutely did. That's so interesting to me because I do see there's a continuum, right? Like we talk about this all the time in Second First, that whoever is in that, we'll just say force multiplier seat, it starts as one thing. It starts as either managing people or processes or tasks, and then it will evolve to coaching. And it can either be coaching other leaders in the organization, or if you're in that EA chief of staff role, coaching your executive, like you're saying, to encourage their growth. The final phase of that continuum is always being like a trusted advisor. Mm-hmm. So someone to really help flesh out ideas together, or play devil's advocate, or help ideate with the executive. So the idea that the person in this role can help facilitate the growth of actually the person that they're technically reporting to, I think is really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was one of the really great parts of my partnership with Adam, who we co-authored books together, we co-hosted podcasts together, was at some point, and I don't really remember when it was probably like maybe 5 years into the partnership. It was probably less than that actually, but it was this mutually beneficial partnership where I was bringing new ideas. He's teaching me how to make, higher level decisions. I'm sharing back the things that I'm learning and saying, how can we take this thing to the next level? Like what we really were, like you said, this trusted advisor partnership where we were just coaching, teaching, and learning together.
So, what has your journey been? Like, tell us a little bit kind of about you and this path that you've taken, because you basically went from being a force multiplier to now an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I've been in the executive support EA chief of staff space for about 15 years, starting as an executive assistant, and then which I did for about 5 years total, moving into chief of staff, which I did for about 10 years. And then about a year and a half ago, honestly, it was a product of the success of the organizations that Adam and I worked on. There was a sale. I really didn't feel like he needed a chief of staff in the same way that he had previously. And which I just told him and said, I don't think you need this role anymore, but here's what I think you do need. We made sure he was all set up. And then I said, I think I'm going to go do the other thing that I love to do, which is coach. And so I actually took a really long career break for like 8 months or so. But then after that, I did take over the company that we co-founded together, the Founder and the Force Multiplier. So I do own that organization now. And through that, I do coaching, consulting, and training. But what's interesting about that is I don't even know if I consider myself really an entrepreneur, which I know is kind of funny. But maybe that's just, my conditioning from being a force multiplier for so long. But I still really feel I am a force multiplier for my clients. Like when I'm coaching, when I'm doing one-on-one coaching, or when I'm doing fractional chief of staff work, or I'm working as a consultant, I am there to force multiply that individual's vision. Whether that is, an executive assistant coaching client, I am getting I need to find out exactly what it is that they want, and then we're going to put a plan in place to make it happen. That's what force multipliers do. And same with my consulting clients. I am figuring out what is the vision of this entrepreneur that I'm working with, and how do I put the plan in place to make it happen? Like I am a force multiplier to my core, even though I might be operating more as an entrepreneur.
I mean, you have a heart to like serve and grow and develop like organizations and people. So that absolutely makes sense. You also mentioned that you have a course. Is that correct? Like a training course? Tell us about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so it's the Force Multiplier Academy. It is a little bit of a course mixed with a little bit of a community and some live coaching, as well as a book club, because books are my life. So we'll be doing a book club together as well. But it is specifically for those in executive assistant, aspiring chiefs of staff, founders, associates, those sorts of roles. But it is a leadership course. I'm not going to teach you how to manage a calendar. I'm going to teach you how to be a leader in this role, and how to lead up, own your career, and become an invaluable and confident strategic partner.
For someone in the force multiplier seat, so someone that is an EA, someone that is a chief of staff or a founder's associate, that's like the new title, like you mentioned, that I'm seeing everywhere. I think it came from Europe. Is that right?
I've seen it in, I think maybe London and Germany most often right now.
Yeah, I love it though. I want it to become more popular over here. What advice do you have for them to start investing in their growth or start developing now?
They need to take control of their own development. That would be the number one thing, because I think that because these positions are often employees, we tend to think it's the employer's responsibility to give us this additional training and education. And I have never felt that way. I've I have had my employer pay for some, but I have invested a ton of my own money and time into development as well, because you might not be at that company forever. And so giving them the power to control your development. Yeah, sure. If your HR department or your leader wants to pay for a coach or wants to pay for a conference, absolutely take advantage of that. But if they don't, or they're not paying for the things that you want to go learn, you have to be willing to take your own, to invest in yourself. And I don't see that happening as much as I would like to see it happening, but I'm hoping that starts changing, because nobody owes you a career. It is your responsibility to manage your own. And I've felt so strongly about that from, when I was 18 years old. Like, you've got to invest in your own training and education and development. And that, yes, that means paying for formal programs, but it also means reading books and listening to podcasts and reading newsletters from industry leaders, and setting aside time, because you have to set aside time and you have to be intentional about your learning, and knowing that if there's something out there that you want to achieve and then there's a gap in your knowledge or a gap in your skills, you can go, there's a million ways that you can go learn those skills or that knowledge, but you have to be willing to take the initiative to do it on your own.
I will second all of that, because I think that now in 2025, people are so lucky to have thought leaders like you creating the Force Multiplier Academy, or, our Second First framework. Those things did not exist. So I, similar to you, the only way that I was a successful COO was 10 years of obsessive consuming. So books, podcasts, Harvard Business Review. The only reason our framework exists now is from those 10 years of piecing things together that I found worked from other thought leaders and other frameworks. These more niche programs that like you have, they're not going to be on the radar of a lot of these HR departments or learning and development teams of these organizations either. So, I mean, we even have a PDF download expense reimbursement letter that executives can turn in and say, I found this course, will you support it? So there really is a level of ownership that I think everyone has to have when it comes to their own development. So I love that you called that out.
Yeah, and I would say, and also realizing that one course is not going to, I mean, sure, maybe it'll start changing your life, but it's not going to change your life, especially when we're talking about things like leadership. Like, you don't go to a weekend conference and come out the other end as a leader. You're going to start developing your awareness. You're going to start getting tools and you're going to start getting insights. But then you have to go do the work of actually implementing those things. And that's where communities, I think, are great, and where communities come into play, because it keeps those conversations top of mind and keeps the conversations going so that you actually are implementing the things that you're learning. Because yes, all of the content is incredible. That's what I do, is produce content. So I'm hoping people are consuming it. And yet it's just not a quick fix. You're just talking about 10 years. Over 10 years for me too, of this journey and this development and this intention of saying, I want to be a leader in this space. It takes time and energy and effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even our newsletters have a similar element where yours has, these are the top 5 things that I have found. Like, it's very curated to try and help save time. Like, we have a Sunday roundup of here's the articles that you should read, here's the podcasts you should listen to, these episodes in particular. So it's like you can try and shortcut, but even books or episodes, there might be just one takeaway.
Exactly.
And it's like that, like you said, that's not the answer, but you might find one line in one book that's the answer for this particular problem that you might run into 3 years from now. So it's really just putting together pieces of the puzzle. So you also are going to be leading an expert session for our Second First membership. Speaking of community, tell us a little bit about what our members are going to get to learn from you.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about how to build a really strong partnership, but one that lasts. Because, I have a 13-year partnership. Actually, we still communicate regularly, and I want to talk a bit about the mistakes people make in those partnerships, how to build trust. We talked about that a little bit here, but how to build trust and the most important things that both a leader and a force multiplier can do in order to build that long-term and long-lasting successful partnership.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for doing that. I think that our members are going to get so much out of it because even in the COO, second in command, VP position, there's a lot. It's a Venn diagram, right? There are overlapping pieces of being a partner to an entrepreneur. So I think that they're going to get a lot from that. How can our listeners work with you? How can they get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I still love an old-fashioned email. So you can email at Hallie@HallieWarner.com if you have any questions or, just looking for a particular resource. And then going to the website, founderandforcemultiplier.com, you can get access to our book there. You can get on the Academy waitlist. We have a lot of downloads, tools, resources, the blog. You can join the newsletter from there.
Amazing. And I'm going to link all of that in our show notes. And I also am going to put a link to your book because I cannot recommend it enough. I love it so much. How much feedback have you gotten on that book in particular?
I mean, it's like it ebbs and flows, right? I mean, the book's been out for, I want to say almost 5 years at this point. It's been out for a while. But surprisingly, yes, we still get quite a bit of people saying, oh, I just read the book. Or you know what? The thing I love the most is when I have either it's an executive assistant or a chief of staff, or sometimes it's the leader themselves. They email me and they'll say, I just bought it for my EA and we're reading it together. Or I will hear, they'll say, my CEO just got me the book and we're reading it. And to me, that is gold. That's what the book was for. It's to read it together and to have it help you engage in conversation so that you are building the partnership.
Ugh, yes. I remember being on a flight to Boston with my CEO, with my entrepreneur, and I was reading the book Rocket Fuel. This was years and years ago. And I like showed it to him on the plane and I was like, hey, this is really cool. Like, and I like mentioned a couple things and he's like, yeah, okay. And then maybe like 3 years later, he's like, I just read this book, Rocket Fuel. We should talk about it. So I love the idea of saying, okay, let's read this at the same time. Let's talk about it. Let's start implementing these things. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you do. I think that this is such an underserved community of just people in the right-hand seat. So I'm thankful for all the effort you are putting in to make sure that that is a little bit less lonely and much more supported.
Thank you.
To find show notes and links for anything mentioned in this episode, visit secondfirst.com/41. Be sure to subscribe to catch future episodes and leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Remember, you don't have to navigate being a second in command alone with the right hand roadmap.